So for today, I kind of wanted to cover the sort of changes that happened from when I first started writing the Fantastic Furrytail, like the very first novel. And today I want to go over the character changes because there's been a lot of changes that have happened as I've continued on in the story and as I figured things out and decided what I like and what I don't like. And I kind of wanted to go through my thought process of it. And I also want to go through, not in this video, but in a couple of future videos of what's changed in the other stories because I tend to not delete my old notes for the plot. I just ignore them. And so it's kind of fun to go through in the future and just kind of just see how I was expecting something to happen versus what actually happened. So with this, everything that is red like this is a change. Is something that is important or isn't in the actual novel anymore. Um, this one, newest. So I've talked about this before, but I have about 8 or 10 different versions of the Fantastic Furrytail. Most of them are just plots, maybe a couple of chapters in, but to me, yeah, this was the newest version, and so I wrote that down because I just had so many old drafts of the novel. Um, so Emma is interesting because she was supposed to have a much more unique role in the story. She was supposed to be a lot more like kind of Kate's sidekick because I designed her to have her mother's strong physical abilities and Sat's sort of um medical sort of wisdom and that sort of stuff. And then she would also have her inventions and her intelligence. And I realized that made her pretty overpowered. And another thing is she's 13 years old. She's a kid. And so even the very idea of her creating these gadgets, even when she's 13 years old, and her hacking into things, I already thought that was a bit overpowered as it was. But another thing, in this section, was Emma was supposed to have kind of like a side arc where she would feel left out from her peers in high school, not high school, middle school, and then she would get bullied for it, and she would have a hard time making friends, and there is supposed to be that sort of side arc in that, and in the novel it's kind of shown, but because there's just so much going on, Kate is the main character. Emma's idea for that sort of side character arc was just kind of pushed to the side, and it just focused on her and Henry because that was kind of the focus was the relationship between Emma and Henry, them starting to become friends, and then eventually falling in love and getting married in the second novel. So that was a pretty big change. This motivation. I actually just changed this motivation 2 or 3 weeks ago because I am currently working through the second novel and how Victor is reacting, especially since he's planned his own death. It's coming up. I realized that due to his sort of mindset, to his due to his personalities, he's very narcissistic, he's very abusive, he's very cruel. He's not going to be able to keep that loving, like, husband mask forever. He's not. He's going to get exhausted, he's going to get tired of it, he's going to toss it to the side. And that's what's been happening. And so Sienna is started to realize what's really going on, how Victor actually sees her, and how she's starting to kind of break the illusion that Victor has put upon her. And so it's really interesting because she was supposed to have undying loyalty to him until his death, and then she would betray him once Victor reveals how he actually felt about her. But due to his more recent behavior, that's already shattered. And so her main motivation right now is how to betray Victor without him noticing. And so that's been very interesting. I love seeing that sort of like change. And she's becoming, rather than a villain, an ally. And I really like that because in the second novel, we're starting to see a lot of Victor's so-called like allies or people that he's been forcing to work with him are starting to betray him regardless of the consequences. And I think that's pretty unique, pretty special, is that due to his behavior, he's his own worst enemy. He's the reason why a lot of his plans are falling apart, why his men aren't willing to work with him. Um, so Insectoid, again, I I finished his scene about a month and a half ago, so his redemption scene. And again, his motivation was to have revenge, on both Victor and on Furrytail for what she did. And I realized, based on what Insectoid or Dr. Helitz, what he's gone through in the last couple of years, a lot of abuse, a lot of human experimentation. He's he's exhausted, he's fed up, and he's starting to realize the error of his ways. He's turning over a new leaf, and so his main goal isn't to get revenge anymore. It's to atone for his sins, because a lot of the things that he's done, the research that he found out, has hurt a lot of people. And so he wants to kind of do one last good action before he dies. And it, even though it doesn't absolve his actions, it shows Shadowclaw and a couple of characters that Kate was right. Some people do deserve second chances, and that some some people are willing to turn over a new leaf. And so that's been a pretty important part of the story as well. This one was a pretty minor change. Is I was thinking about how to kind of motivate Vesa to like fight Furrytail in the second novel, and to kind of create like a cool upgrade for her. And I came up with a sort of special challenge based on Victor's sort of like goals. And I realized that maybe having Vesa fight Kate isn't the best idea. Especially since Vesa doesn't seem like the sort of person that would ever work with Victor. Um, no matter what. And even if he were to hold her tribe hostage, I don't think her honor, her pride would allow her to do it. Um, she's a very, very by the book. No, that's not the right wording, but a very honor bound individual. She doesn't back down, even when she's being threatened. And her people are like that as well. And so, those are how that's kind of changed. Um, Winova, and this was very interesting. When I created Winova, I was thinking more of like a Deathstroke sort of character. So a sort of assassin that would be able to fight Kate, never be defeated, basically. Just very skilled at everything. Just able to go toe to toe with Furrytail. And I realized that I didn't like it. I did some research into assassins, and I realized that a big part of being an assassin is you don't want to get caught. You are not trained to handle hand-to-hand combat. You are trained to quickly sneak in, take a life, and get out. Because if you get caught, you're basically screwed. And that was the main change, is I turned Winova from a very threatening, almost overpowering sort of villain into a coward. And I liked that because I realized that a lot of Winova's actions, how she's been able to fulfill these bounties is it's not fair. It's just good business, and then she just does something horrible. Because that's the only way she can kind of get away with anything, is that she cannot handle herself in a one-on-one fight, especially against a skilled opponent. And so it was an interesting weakness that I gave her, and it's coming up in the second novel as well, because she shows up at the end of Act 2, and she's going to have a pretty big influence on Shadowclaw, because Shadowclaw really believed that Winova deserved the death penalty, and because of that, she should have been eliminated. And to have these two characters meet in person one on one is going to be very interesting, especially since Winova has not changed as an individual. And so it's going to be very fun, and it's going to push Shadowclaw in a certain direction that I'm excited for. Um, yeah, those are my thoughts. Another thing was supposed to be the money, was the motivation. Um, it's not a very good motivation. The I would say the true motivation is just to get revenge. It's not about the money anymore. It's about basically evening the odds in Winova's eyes. She wants to get revenge for Furrytail ruining her perfect track record. You may have also noticed that a lot of these have motivations called the Howling Alliance. And so the Howling Alliance was actually supposed to be a kind of like a supervillain team led by Victor. But the issue is Victor doesn't work well with other people. He threats, he charms his way through people, and because everyone else realizes who Victor really is and how he acts and treats others, he can't work with other people. They will refuse to work with him. And so Kate even says this in the second novel, that this isn't an alliance, that the villains aren't working together. It's a hostage situation. Victor is threatening other people, threatening past villains to get them to do what he wants. And so both Kate and Shadowclaw, as they are battling these villains, they are having to decide, do these people deserve a second chance? Or how do I rescue this person from Victor? And so that's just been very interesting that it's kind of turned into a mission rather than an alliance. And I find that very fun and very interesting. Um, so Vanessa, both of her motivations have drastically changed. And I believe I mentioned this in the book, but Vanessa was supposed to be pure evil. Um, except when it came to Henry, where she would love Henry, and she still does, but the issue is she's not doing these evil things because she's evil and she wants eternal youth and power. She's doing it because if she doesn't, Henry is threatened. And so that's been her main motivation throughout all of the throughout both novels is she's just a selfless individual, a mother who's trying to protect her son from getting hurt. And so that's just been very interesting to see how she interacts with Kate, who is also a mother. And so that's just been fun to kind of play around with. This one's another big one, um, which is Shadowclaw was originally supposed to be like a demon or a like someone who gained Furrytail's powers and became evil. And I've talked about that in my research and representations video where I changed that idea, where I didn't like the idea of Shadowclaw being pure evil, especially once I realized my mistake with Protector Altars. I changed that completely. And so, yeah, that's not a thing anymore. Um, that's been a really big change where Shadowclaw is not a villain. She's an antagonist at times, and she will still be an antagonist in the second novel, but she's also a hero, a tragic hero, who is trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And what's really interesting is Kate is deciding the exact same thing as well. Both of them are being pushed to decide what is morally right in a certain situation. And so that's been fun to play around with. You've noticed that down here it says in secret. So in the second novel, this is kind of a spoiler, but Shadowclaw will eventually take Victor's place as the ruler of the world. Um, but it's not out of cruelty. It's not out of something evil or monstrous. It's out of love and protection. She's being pushed into believing that she can find a utopia. She can like foster like world peace. And so that's what she wants. Is eventually she will take Victor's place and instead of being an evil monstrous tyrant, she's a tyrant built on love and protection, where she is administering justice against criminals. She is protecting the innocent. She is stopping wars and stopping crimes. But the issue is there's a reason why Victor is having her take his place because ultimate power corrupts absolutely. Um, Even though world peace seems like a good idea, having that much power and influence in one person's hands is going to corrupt them eventually. And so we'll see how that goes. I'm halfway through Act 2, and when she takes Victor's place, we'll be halfway through Act 3 onward. And so that'll be fun to see. His greatest fear is boredom. That is not his greatest fear. Even though Victor doesn't like boredom, he hates it, and he is a very curious individual. He likes excitement. Um, his greatest fear is being humiliated. And I did some research on people with narcissistic mindsets, people who are bullies, who are corrupt, and that tends to be their greatest fear is being seen as weak, being seen as irrelevant or humiliated. And that's exactly what happens to Victor at the end of the first novel. And so that pushes him into his obsession with legacy, obsession with trying to create something so big and so massive that even after his death, his influence will still live on. And so that is his greatest fear, is being forgotten. And so that's how that changed. Yeah. So we've already talked about the Halloween Alliance. The novel was supposed to be called The Darkest Days. And what was the original idea was it was just going to be just Kate hunting down each of the dead man's switches, and then fighting Victor at the very end, leading to his death. But it just seemed so basic. It would basically be like, here's the basic plot. Act 1 is the introduction. The villains return. Maybe Kate fights like one villain. Then Act 2, Kate fights two villains. Act 3, Kate fights two villains. Act 4, Kate fights two villains. Then Act 5, Kate fights Celestial Star and Victor, and eventually leads to his death. That was just so basic. It wasn't something super exciting. And I realized that if Victor is willing to kind of get himself killed on his own terms, he would want something that would outlast him, something that would continue his influence after he dies. And that's where the successor idea comes in. Um, why he pits Shadowclaw. And so I'm excited for that. We'll see how that goes, but the plot is a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be. Villain powers. So Celestial Star, her her upgrade was going to be basically her copies can hurt Furrytail, and she can phase through attacks, but she can focus on it. But one thing I realized is I was sitting there, it's like, oh, if you really amplify someone who has sort of light manipulation, you can change how an entire room looks like. You can change how other people appear. You can turn an entire group of people invisible. And so that's where her upgrade is turned into. Isla Magmore. Again, this was something that I was kind of surprised about, where as like, oh, maybe they could already do this, but in the book, I realized that no, they couldn't, which was Isla and Magmar able to turn their bodies into fire and ice. Um, no, they were just people who just had the ability to summon fire or ice. But in the upgraded version now, they are just fire and ice. Their bodies have been turned into that. And that leads into a very tragic sort of backstory for both of them. How both of them have now been turned into these elemental forms. Isla is now pure ice, and Magmar is just pure fire. How can they love each other? And so that was the big change was they become a lot more tragic simply because of what Victor had done to them. And so that's going to play a pretty interesting role in the second novel and mostly in the third novel as well, as they are coming to terms with this, and I am planning on them being able to get help with what they're dealing with what they're struggling with. Able to basically just hold each other again, to give each other like a peck on the lips is a huge deal now because they can't be physically intimate. And so just to have that sort of opportunity again um, is going to mean a very big deal in the third novel. And so those are my sort of plans for that. Um, so prehistoric predator, this is Vesa, and I highlighted the her because this is pretty important because in the second novel the story kind of changes. Um, I was planning on her being a dinosaur hybrid, with her being like an apex predator. And things did not turn out the way I was expecting. And so instead of her being able to be the deadly hybrid, it's Victor. And so that's how that's kind of changed. And I'm excited for it. Um, Baron von Jaws. Yeah, he was supposed to have a much kind of like darker arena where he'd be testing like unknown substances and technologies on the gladiators to kind of force them to become like superhuman and stronger. It didn't really fit in my novel. Vanessa Hallows. She was supposed to, in all my oldest drafts, Vanessa was always supposed to have a creepy doll called Little Missy that would basically just kind of, I don't know, become like a monster where it looks like a doll and then it just like its limbs like extend and bend in weird ways and teeth and fangs come shooting out of its mouth and it's just this creepy monstrous thing. Um, and I basically threw that idea away because number one, it doesn't really fit with Vanessa anymore. And number two, Story 7 focused more on Shadowclaw than it did on Vanessa. And so I'm sorry, Vanessa, you don't have your creepy little demon anymore. Um, but that was the original idea. Um, this one is really big, which is the spells. For both Henry and Vanessa. So, to explain the sort of magic system that both covens believe in, Henry's coven, it is in order to heal someone else, you have to be able to take a cost upon yourself. For example, if you want to heal someone's paper cut, you have to be the one who has to suffer with the paper cut, or something similar. With Vanessa's, it's the exact opposite. You hurt someone else, and in exchange, you get a benefit. And so that's how she was able to have eternal youth. In the first novel, how she was able to have this sort of power because she had made these deals with these demons um, to go feed on the fear of other people. So other people are paying the cost. And that was uh, that's going to play a pretty interesting role because again, she's going to be using demonic magic against Kate, but if her heart's not in it, and if that spell gets broken, she's going to be the one who's going to pay the price, and it's going to be severe, and that's going to be hard for Henry. I haven't decided on what that cost will be, but I have thought about it, and I realized that it needs to be something serious. So we'll see how that goes. And this one is one that's currently in the first novel. I think I'm going to get rid of it. I might go back to that scene and just delete it, which is the spells need a symbol drawn on the ground in order to work. I keep forgetting about it. Um, so it's just gone. And so yeah, they don't need a symbol drawn on the ground. It's just not needed anymore. And so the spells just focus on the costs of the spells instead. Are you going to be the one who's going to suffer, or is someone else going to be the one who's going to suffer? I feel like that's just more interesting and more fun to kind of play around with. Again, Shadowclaw. Very big changes. Evil. She is not evil. She is not apathetic. Yeah, I think I'm saying that right. She is not apathetic, selfish, or prideful. She was supposed to mimic Fairy Tail's like gadgets and abilities, but since she's not evil anymore, she doesn't use something like poison gas instead of the catnip grenades or the smoke grenades. Basically, the only difference is Shadowclaw is bigger than Furry Tail, and she uses guns. She has pistols that she uses. Um, Again, because she is a separate individual in the second novel, and because of Victor's plans for her, and because she's not evil anymore, I changed that she was more human, more realistic. Um, yeah, she's not gonna be this evil, demonic force in Kate's back of her mind. It's just going to be basically they're going to be separate. And so that's going to be very interesting. Is they're separated, they're going on their own journeys, being pushed by these external forces, and they're deciding for themselves what is right and what is wrong. And it's going to put her and Kate at odds, especially since there is an outside force that is beginning to influence Shadowclaw in a certain direction, pretending to be good, when in actuality it is something um, just evil. And that goes with the whole tyrant idea is let's go with world peace, but at what cost? And so I'm playing around with that. Um, but it's been fun. I keep saying that. I keep saying that's been fun. Anyway, moving on. Let me see. Okay, so we're almost done. Victor was supposed to have vicious attack dogs. He doesn't. I just never really got around to it. I kind of forgot. I also keep forgetting about Kate's gadgets. That's why she doesn't have an upgrade in the second novel. It's just, I feel like she has a pretty good skill set as is, and I can't remember everything that she has already. Um, this one was interesting. Forces the entire world, not just criminals, to battle or shun Furrytail through threats of blackmail. Yeah, that's not happening. Because of what Victor has done, people are basically pushing back against him whenever they can. Um, there are some people who do see Furrytail as a threat, as someone who has ruined lives, but the vast majority of the world still sees Kate as a victim of Victor. And most of Victor's criminal empire still doesn't like Victor. They hate him. They want to get rid of him. And so they're willing to help Kate with taking them down whenever they can. And so that's how that's gone. So that's everything I had for today. Thanks for listening.